After his uncle gets a new wife, 16-year-old Mark is tasked with entertaining his new 14-year-old cousin for the summer. As the two grow closer, the relationship grows sexual, and Mark has to deal with how this will affect their family. Welcome back to Nonstop Recap. Today we'll be recapping the 2015 romantic drama Natasha. The film opens with a montage of some teenage boys partying one night. One of these boys is named Mark, and we see him start to get intimate with a girl before she pushes him off of her and stops. Still pent up, Mark goes home and watches some adult films before relieving himself and falling asleep. In the morning, Mark's mom Bella wakes him and tells him that his uncle Fima is coming to visit with his new fiancée Zina, who just moved to Toronto from Moscow. Eventually, Fima and Zina come to visit alongside several other family members. Fima bends over to serve food to people, and Mark can't help but look down her shirt. Later that night, he talks with his cousin Jana about what she thinks of Zina. Jana is pessimistic and thinks Fima would have been better off with a cat. Their moms come out and criticize the two for speaking so poorly about Zina. Jana comments on how Zina was dressed and points out that even Mark noticed her chest. The moms say that they know Zina might not seem great, but she can't be crazy because she has a daughter. Speaking of which, Zina returns to Russia to meet up with her 14-year-old daughter Natasha before the two come back to Toronto to move in with Fima. The whole family goes to meet them at the airport, and Mark is formally introduced to Natasha, who doesn't seem happy to be moving. In the car on the way home, Mark's parents and grandparents discuss who Natasha's father is and clearly aren't happy that her father isn't Jewish like they are. The next day, Mark visits his friend Rufus, and the two divide up some drugs so that Mark can go deliver them. Afterwards, we see a montage of Mark as he goes to make his deliveries. He gets home and his dad pesters him about getting a job. His mom comments that Mark spends too much of his time reading, but his grandmother defends him, saying she should be grateful that Mark grew up in Canada and had a normal life. She comments that Natasha acts a little strange because she grew up in Moscow and will do things like walk around the house in just her underwear. We then cut to Fima and Zina's wedding, and Mark stares at Natasha during the ceremony. The family celebrates after the wedding, but Jana leaves early to go hang out with her friend. Mark's mom leans over and tells Mark that Natasha probably also wants to leave, and he should bring her back to their house. Mark shows Natasha around his house before eventually bringing her into his room. She asks what he does in there, and Mark says that he just watches TV and reads. She then asks if he's ever slept with anyone in there. Mark is caught off guard, and Natasha tells him not to answer if he doesn't want to. She tells him that she's slept with 100 guys and will also sleep with him, but Mark doesn't take her up on it. They then start talking about Zina, and Natasha begins ripping into her mother and saying that she sleeps around a lot and will ruin Fima's life. In the next scene, we see Mark at his first day of work as a telemarketer. Mark hates the job, and that night he tells his mom he isn't going to work there anymore, even though his uncle Jenna helped get the job for him. His mom decides that since he isn't going to take the job, then he'll have to spend his free time entertaining Natasha and getting her out of the house because she thinks it'll help strengthen the marriage between Fima and Zina. The next day, Mark heads to Zina's apartment and talks with her for a little bit before she takes him up to Natasha's room. Natasha won't speak with her mother, and Zina gets angry with her, causing her to storm out of the house. Mark chases after her, and Natasha confides in him over how much she hates her mom. He then takes her to Rufus's house, and Rufus is immediately interested in her. He starts to flirt with her, but Mark warns him that she's only 14 and only speaks Russian. Afterwards, Mark and Natasha go for a walk before parting ways. At dinner that night, Mark's mom asks how things went with Natasha, and he says it was all good. Once again, his father gets on his case about getting a job. The next day, Mark is reading in his room when Natasha knocks on his window and asks to be let in. She asks Mark about the book he was reading, and the two talk about philosophy. Afterwards, he gives her a bike and takes her with him as he delivers drugs. The men he's delivering to hit on her and invite her to smoke with them. The two then head back to Mark's house, and he works in the garden while she asks what smoking is like because she's only ever drank. Natasha eats dinner with Mark's family and goes on a walk with them before heading home. She goes into Mark's room through the window the next day, and the two smoke together. Mark starts to read, and Natasha opens up his laptop. She sees that he was watching some adult videos and tells him that she wants to show him something. She then starts to show him scandalous photos of her on an adult site before stripping and sleeping with Mark. Afterwards, she tells him about how she's been taking the photos for a few years. She mentions that her mom found out and made her pay some of the money toward their rent. Natasha says that she didn't take the photos for the money, which makes her better than her mother. We then see a montage of Natasha and Mark as they spend every day together, sleeping together and doing various activities, such as going to a party and going to an art museum. One day, after a trip in the city, Mark's mom invites Natasha to sleep over because Zena and Fima left for a sudden trip. Natasha and Mark watch TV with his parents that night, and Natasha reminisces about her home in Moscow with Mark's father. Natasha and Mark go to sleep in separate rooms that night, but Natasha wakes Mark up because she couldn't sleep. The two talk, and Natasha says it's so much better at Mark's house than at her own house. She reveals that Zena makes Fima sleep on the couch and that she's cheating on him with Natasha's father. She then says that she told Fima about what her mother was doing, but that her mother lied and got Fima to agree to a weekend trip so she could show him how much she loved him. We then see a clip of Natasha, Mark, and his parents all eating as Zena and Fima talk about how amazing their trip was. A fight ends up breaking out between Natasha and her mother, and Zena ends up exclaiming that she knows what's going on between Natasha and Mark. After they leave, Mark's mom tells him that he's done hanging out with Natasha. Mark goes to his room and texts Natasha asking her to come over the next day. We see him reading the next day, but he keeps getting distracted by looking at the window and waiting for Natasha to come by. Mark ends up heading over to Rufus's house where he finds out that Rufus is having a pool installed. The two hang out, and eventually Rufus asks where Natasha is. Mark says that she's with her mom, and Rufus comments that he thought Natasha hated her mom. Mark says that she does, and Rufus tells him that he should go rescue her. Mark refuses and says that he's forbidden from seeing her, but eventually he decides he wants to go to her apartment. He goes there and talks to Zena, who tells him that she doesn't blame him because Natasha has seduced many men much older than him. Zena then says it's better if he doesn't see Natasha anymore and closes the door in Mark's face right as Natasha walks out and sees him. That night, Natasha shows up outside Mark's window and they talk outside. Natasha yells at Mark for not doing anything to help her when he was at her apartment earlier. And when he tries to defend himself, she just insults him even further. Natasha also has a suitcase with her and tells Mark that she's leaving for Florida to meet up with a rich businessman who has promised her a job. She asks Mark to go with her and says that the man could get him a job too, but Mark ultimately refuses. She then reveals to him that Zena left Fima because Natasha seduced him and they got caught. Mark is disgusted, but Natasha says she had to do it in order to break them up. Despite this, Mark still brings her into the house to give her a place to stay for the night. He leads her to his room, and it seems like she wants him to get into bed with her, but Mark sleeps on the floor. In the morning, he wakes Natasha up and gives her some of the money he's made from selling drugs before telling her to leave. Mark seems conflicted and racked with guilt after Natasha walks off, and he collapses into bed before ripping off his sheets. He goes to breakfast with his family later and finds everyone talking about the situation between Zena and Fima. Mark goes out for a bike ride to clear his head and gets a call from Rufus. However, Mark declines it. When he gets home and sits down for dinner with everyone, and the family is now discussing Jewish and Palestinian political issues, Mark zones out for the night, too caught up in his own thoughts about Natasha to really pay attention to what everyone else is saying. He goes out that night and walks toward Natasha's apartment building, but he chickens out and walks home without trying to see her. The next day, he bikes over to Rufus's house and sees that Natasha is there. Mark is fuming, and Rufus tells him that this is what he was trying to call him about. Mark thinks that Rufus is sleeping with Natasha, but Rufus insists that she had nowhere to go and he wanted to help her. Mark wants to go talk to her, but Rufus warns him not to because she's angry at him. Natasha watches as Mark storms off without saying a word to him. Mark furiously rides home and walks into his backyard where he looks into his bedroom window, seeing his room the exact same way that Natasha did. Click one of the videos on screen for more.